Welcome into Outkick the Show, presented by sportsbookreview.com. Several different big stories we want to hit, but I want to start with college football recruiting. And one of the best things you can do in the world of college football recruiting is look at overall performance. A lot of people get hung up on looking at individual recruits. And I understand if you think you're a genius because you watch some 16 or 17-year-old's high school football film and you are going to be spectacular when it comes to breaking down how good they're going to translate to at the next level. All those things are fine. What I try to look at is the totality of the performance of the class. In other words, how many 4 and 5 stars do you end up with? And I feel like every year, we have to make this argument again because there's so many people out there who say, oh, recruiting class rankings don't matter. What star you got doesn't matter. There's always somebody who goes viral and they say, hey, look at all the 2 and 3 stars that turn into Pro Bowlers. There's more 2 stars drafted than 3 stars. All those things are idiocy, okay? Over a historic basis, if you are a 4 or a 5 star, your chances of getting drafted are infinitely higher because there are many fewer of them, 4 and 5 stars. There are a lot more people who are 2 and 3 stars that can turn into star players, right? So from that perspective, I would just say in general, think about probabilities. If your team is going to win a championship, they probably need a lot of 4 and 5 stars. And I'm going to update my rankings of recruiting class rankings later. Maybe today, maybe later in the week. I might wait until the full classes are all in February. But I got to tell you, if you go look at who has won national championships, every team since 1996, except for 2000 Oklahoma, has had at least 2 top 10 recruiting classes before it won a national championship. And most of them of late have had 4 top 10 recruiting classes because that is the new signpost. 3 is the minimum, okay? Of the 4 playoff teams this year, Notre Dame and Oklahoma, who are both substantial underdogs, have 2 top 10 recruiting classes in the last 4 years. Alabama has 4. And Clemson has 3. So if you look at the trajectory coming into this season, there were only 12 teams in America that had 2 or more top 10 recruiting classes in the previous 4 years. That is the ground floor now for what you need in order to win a championship. So with that in mind, who has actually put together a top 10 recruiting class this year? And then I'll break down a little bit further as we go down the list. Okay, I like to use now as my source. Everybody's got a different source. You can cite Scout. You can cite Rivals. You can cite 24/7, ESPN recruiting rankings. What I try to do is focus on the composite ranking that they do at 24/7, so it takes away the outliers. So if somebody thinks your class is going to be amazing, you don't get to pick and choose. You just look at the overall averages, okay? With that in mind, this is the most dominant recruiting class in the history of the Southeastern Conference. There's lots of people out there that want to be SEC haters. The simple reason why the SEC has been as dominant as it has been over the last 15 or so years is because they have better players. The last 12 years, every year in the NFL draft, the SEC has produced more draft picks than anybody else. And the coaching matters and everything else matters. But ultimately, what matters is how many quality players you have. And so here is the top 10. Alabama looks like they are going to edge out Georgia with, again, a number 1 class. That's what Nick Saban has done basically since he got to Alabama. Signed number 1 rated recruiting classes. Georgia is going to finish, it appears, in the 24/7 composite class, 2nd place. 3rd place, and this is the biggest surprise so far, Texas A&M. Jimbo Fisher is on a big-time hot streak. This is his first full recruiting class as the head coach of Texas A&M. And if you aren't buying into the fact that the Aggies are putting together a different caliber of athlete and a different caliber of team than they've ever had before, you haven't been paying attention. This is a tremendous class that A&M has put together. They are right now the number 3 overall recruiting class in America, and we've never seen this before. In the 4 spot is LSU. We've never seen one class dominate like this, one conference dominate like this at the top of a class. The top 4 classes in the country are all in the SEC: Alabama, Georgia, Texas A&M, and LSU. It's unheard of. This is the most dominant collection of player talent that has ever been put together in the Southeastern Conference at the top of the draft. And yeah, I said draft. This is kind of like a draft. It's kind of like signing day. It's kind of like Christmas morning. Best team outside of the SEC so far. Give props to Mario Cristobal for what he has done at Oregon. The Ducks have put together an incredible class that looks to be an elite level gathering of talent, particularly in relation to everybody else that is being recruited against in the Pac-12. USC is putting together one of its worst classes ever. Most dominant recruiting class in the history of the SEC. Clemson sliding in at number 6, best class in the ACC, best class so far in the Big Ten. Michigan is in the 7 spot. Then you've got Oklahoma. I do think Lincoln Riley. A lot of people say, what's the difference between Lincoln Riley and Bob Stoops? Certainly the offense is a lot different, but I think Lincoln Riley has aggressively stepped up the quality of player that Oklahoma is getting. If you compare recruiting at Oklahoma pre-Lincoln Riley to post-Lincoln Riley, the Sooners have gotten a lot more aggressive in competing for top-of-the-line level players. I don't want to say Bob Stoops was lazy, but he wasn't bringing in the same caliber of player, same caliber of athlete, same caliber of recruit so far that Lincoln Riley is. Texas is number 9. Decent class for Texas. Okay class. Tom Herman has put together a couple of good classes. Penn State sliding in at the number 10 spot, and they don't yet have a full allotment of their recruits. Their average star rating is actually really high. In fact, if you look at Penn State's average star rating, they would be number 3 behind Alabama and Georgia if you just went by the average star of their commitments. Okay, that's the top 10. So what do we learn from the top 10? 4 SEC schools, 2 Big Ten schools, 1 ACC school, I'm counting out here as we go, and Oklahoma and Texas from the Big 12. Those are the 10 best classes that are being put together in this composite class ranking so far. Now, 88% of the top 250 recruits will sign today, but the other 12% are still to come, so there could still be some movement in these class ratings. I'm going to add in that caveat because there are still a lot of big guys out there that could change things, all right? Beyond the top 10, what do we see? Florida State. I would say just an okay class for Willie Taggart. The expectation was when Willie Taggart went to FSU, this guy is going to recruit like gangbusters. I think probably jumping around to as many different schools, South Florida to Oregon to FSU, hurt him a little bit here this year. I think also the fact that Florida State was not very good on the field hurt him. I would say if you've been buying stock in all the top recruits as coaches, as recruiters, that he would have been higher in the expectation. Notre Dame is 12. Brian Kelly's done really well as a recruiter at Notre Dame when you consider the restrictions he has in terms of getting players into that school. One of the great untold stories. Again, I told you that Notre Dame has 2 top 10 classes in the last 4 years. The quality of overall talent at Notre Dame has gone up. Okay? The quality of Notre Dame has gone up over the years. Auburn is sitting at 13. They only have 16 commits in right now. It's hard to know. Again, their star rating really high. You don't get rated fully until you get to at least 20 members of your class. You're competing at a disadvantage until then. So until the class fills out at 20 full numbers of players, it's hard to get a total picture so far. Ohio State also under 20 commits. There's zero doubt that Urban Meyer's departure hurt Ohio State. There's talk that Justin Fields is going to end up at Ohio State. They lost their longtime quarterback commitment based on that rumor. that might happen. So Ohio State coming in at 14, Washington at 15. Florida closed decently, but still I would say for the Florida Gators in their first year under Dan Mullen, 16 has to be a little bit of a disappointment. Not that highly rated of a recruiting class. Florida hasn't recruited at an elite level since Urban Meyer left, really. I know Will Muschamp did decently, but McElwain never did that well. And 16 in the first year for Dan Mullen, I think it's just okay. Tennessee is at 17, and I follow Tennessee a little bit closer. They've got 3, 4, or 5 stars that are still to be committed is the expectation down the road. I want to give a shout out. This is actually really cool. One of Tennessee's commitments in this year's class is a kid named Jackson Lampley. He was 8 years old when I wrote Dixieland Delight, and he is in the book. He is now an offensive tackle, a 4-star recruit from MBA, big private school in Nashville. He is now signing with the University of Tennessee, which makes me feel really old. But he's in the book as an 8-year-old Vol fan. If you read Dixieland Delight, he is now 18 years old, and he is signing to play football for the University of Tennessee. Really cool story. Good kid. That's wild to think about, going from 8 years old to signing with Tennessee. Now, his dad is Brad Lampley, who was a big-time recruit for Phil Fulmer back in the day. So the bloodlines are pretty good there. But still, to write about an 8-year-old kid and then see him turn into a 4-star and be graduating from MBA and signing his papers today as a 4-star recruit is pretty cool. Mississippi State, 18 overall. I know there's a lot of optimism among State fans that maybe they could get Justin Fields to consider transferring to Mississippi State because Joe Moorhead recruited him when he was initially committed to Penn State, when Moorhead was the offensive coordinator there. Impressive class being put together by who I think is the most underrated coach in all of college football, David Shaw. David Shaw out at Stanford. It's hard to get into Stanford. I know they rejected me for law school. It's hard to get into Stanford, even if you are a football player. They get the cream of the crop. I've said this before. If I could pick any school in America for my kids to go play sports at, it would be Stanford. I think they'd get the best of both academics and business. Second, by the way, Vanderbilt. All right, I'm pretty comfortable with Vanderbilt being one of the choices too. Arkansas is at 20. South Carolina, 21. Arkansas people are really excited about that number 20 ranked class in the 24/7 composite index. They are at the 20th spot, despite the fact that they went 2-10. So that's a good collection of talent for Arkansas. South Carolina sliding in at 21. Ole Miss at 22. I want to pause here for a second. This means that of the top 22 teams in college football right now, in this recruiting class ranking, 11 of them are from the SEC. So if you are Ole Miss right now, and you're an Ole Miss fan, and you're sitting around, you're saying, hey, I feel pretty good about the class we put together. Our 28 commitments, we got a lot of talent there. They're number 22 in the nation, but they are number 11 in the SEC. Think about how wild and high level that competition is, that Ole Miss is 22 in the nation, 11 overall in the country. First class for Scott Frost, I would say it's just okay. Just okay for Nebraska to finish in the 23rd spot. Purdue impressed me. Jeff Brom getting a top 25 class is very impressive. NC State racking up a top 25 class. That is the top 25. A couple of Big Ten schools outside, Wisconsin, Michigan State, USC being as far down as they are, even though they don't have a full allotment, reflects the trouble that Clay Helton is facing. Then you continue on down. Kentucky, not able to put together very much optimism, coming in at 31 overall in the 24/7 composite index, despite the fact that they went 9-3 this year. I think that has to be a little bit disappointing to Stoops in being able to do that. That's kind of the roster as you run through. One thing that's interesting is that UCLA, we'll see whether or not Chip Kelly is able to win at a high level at UCLA. But right now, I think this is kind of wild. UCLA is in the 55 spot. Now, they only have 14 commits, and maybe they're going to sign people later. But for UCLA to be 55 in year one of Chip Kelly, a little bit ominous. Makes you wonder how hard he has actually been rooting on the recruiting trail. All right, questions from you guys. What questions do you guys have? Somebody says the SEC isn't the only conference that plays football. Nope, it's not the only conference. It's a conference that plays football the best. Data point for you. What percentage of the audience do you think that watches College Game Day is SEC fans? They do these data analysis to try to figure out like the fervency of a fan base. Not only how much do you love a sport, but how much time do you actually spend watching the sort of the apparatus of college football, College Game Day being a prime example. It's 55%, which I found to be a staggering number. When you consider there are 5 major conferences in America, for the SEC audience to represent 55% of the audience that will watch a show like College Game Day, that means the other 4 major conferences in America, Pac-12, ACC, Big 12, and the Big 10, represent 45%. That's pretty wild. People make fun of that commercial. It just means more. It really does. People love college football more in the SEC, just like Canada loves the NHL more than any other part of North America. The part of North America that loves college football the most, I'm not saying that your region doesn't, is the SEC. And it's the middle part of the country in general. Big Ten and SEC is the heartbeat of college football. Pac-12 is falling behind. ACC, you got a lot of shadow SEC programs, by which I mean Georgia Tech, Florida State, Clemson. All those schools Louisville wish they were in the SEC. They're in SEC states. But the Northeast is a wasteland for college football talent. So I appreciate all of you. I've got to go run and do my other show here, my television show on FS1. I'm going to give you some gambling picks, picking on San Diego State, and they are playing against Ohio. I'm on Ohio minus 2.5. So this is the play that I'm going to make. And look, don't have mosquito dick response to SEC dominance. All right? Stop making excuses. Your life would be better if you just acknowledged, if you are a college football fan, the SEC has better players and the people care more there. Instead of having mosquito dick syndrome and making all these bad excuses all the time for bias and everything else, just acknowledge that the SEC is better. Doesn't mean your school's not good. It means that by and large, people in the SEC care more and the talent on the teams is better. Don't be, somebody just said, good point, don't be Danny Cannell. Don't run around making arguments that are flagrantly untrue and just getting dunked on by facts time after time after time. Somebody just said, I'm a Notre Dame fan. If you're a Notre Dame fan, it doesn't mean Notre Dame is bad. It means that the SEC as a group has better talent. If you're an Ohio State or you're a Michigan fan, it doesn't mean that Ohio State and Michigan are bad. It just means that the SEC is a lot better. And again, I've run through the list of all the moves, but I would say this is the most dominant recruiting class the SEC has ever put together. And in 3 or 4 years, you will see that the recruiting analysts are correct when these guys go pro and the SEC schools produce more draft picks than before. Don't try and argue with facts, right? Don't try and argue with facts with stupid opinions. That, to me, is the sign of a mosquito dick. Don't be a mosquito dick. All right, a couple of other details here. Cam Newton being held out, I think, is a smart move by the Panthers. Should have happened already. I hope you jumped on yesterday on Lock It In. If you were watching the show, I said get on the Atlanta Falcons +3 while you can. That line has now swung 6 full points. If you listened to me yesterday and you bet the Atlanta Falcons when I gave it out yesterday on Lock It In, you're sitting at +6 right now as you roll into that game. I thought the Atlanta Falcons being a 3-point favorite was not smart regardless. I said that Cam Newton was probably not going to play. If you watched him play on Monday night, he was clearly not 100%. And as a result, you're now +6. You've created a pretty substantial middle for yourself in a 6-point swing there. I may take advantage of that middle before the week is done on Lock It In as well. Cam Newton out, and Penny Hardaway and Rick Barnes are going at it. I don't necessarily think this is a bad move for Penny Hardaway, but I think Penny Hardaway has to be careful here. He sounds not very smart when he's criticizing Rick Barnes for the way that the Tennessee players were behaving, as if there was about to be a brawl. And Penny Hardaway, if I were him, I would focus on the coaching aspect of the game, which he's just jumping into without any preparation for it all. Maybe he's going to be a good coach. It's clear that he's a good recruiter and that he has good connections with players in the Memphis area. But will he turn into a good coach? I'd be a little bit nervous about that if I were a Memphis fan. He can create enthusiasm, but at some point that enthusiasm starts to dim if you can't win at a high level. Rick Barnes may well win a national championship with Tennessee this year. At a minimum, he's got him in the top 5 in the country. I think it is pretty extraordinary. Somebody just asked for a Justin Fields prediction. Based on Georgia flipping a 5-star quarterback commit, I think the expectation is that he goes to Ohio State right now. So I love all of you guys. Appreciate the time. I've got to go sit down and get ready for my television show. Go analyze the recruiting rankings. I'll continue to talk about it tomorrow. I'll write about it as well. Be live tomorrow, 6 to 9 a.m. Eastern on Outkick the Coverage, my daily morning radio show. Right now, encourage you to set the DVRs. Come hang out with us on Lock It In. We'll be breaking down the NFL weekend coming up, as well as all the bowl games this week, giving you some gambling picks. I am Clay Travis. This has been Outkick the Show. Kisses to you. Also, go check out my guy, Ryan Kelly, if you need a home loan at The Home Loan Expert. Wipe out all of your credit card debt in one fell swoop and get a great new mortgage at 3 or 4% interest rate. That's The Home Loan. That's TheHomeLoanExpert.com. Kisses, DBAP boys and girls, unless you need to SBAP. I'm Clay Travis, and this has been Outkick the Show. Love you. Thank you, Facebook. See y'all.